Welcome to the supplement to the main message. This is going to be just one quick comment on the business of following and then a bit of Bible study of John chapter 10, the main passage from which I spoke. If you have a Bible and would like to do this little bit, then please find John chapter 10 and have that open. So pause the video if you need to find that. If you don't have a Bible, why not go online? You will soon find the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verse 1, and that's where we'll be starting. So pause the video if you need to. Access the scripture so that you've got it open in front of you. That would be my recommendation. But before we turn to the little bit of Bible study that I suggest we do, I want to make a more generalized point from my main message that, of course, when you follow in the sense of a Twitter account, if in the sense of a blogger, when you follow a person on social media, like on Instagram or whatever, it doesn't mean that you invest that person actually with very much authority. I've followed people who I strongly disagree with, but I've been interested to hear what they're saying. I've followed people who I think are quite mistaken, and I won't be basing any action upon their recommendations or their perspective. But I've also followed people because I value their opinion and their perspective seems to be worth hearing. When I follow Jesus, however, it is not like following a social media account, which is quite passive. To follow Jesus, I'm not just listening for an opinion, I'm listening for the voice of God. And I'm looking then to get up, make decisions, make changes, and move on in life in new ways, following the Good Shepherd. So there is obviously a big difference between the following that is quite passive, just passing interest, maybe approval, maybe not, that social media allows, and indeed other forms of conversation allow, and following, which is a disciple's following, which is a clear decision to make decisions and carry out actions. Anyway, let's go now to our Bible study from John chapter 10. This won't take very long. Thank you so much for giving this little bit of time to it. It seems to me that in John chapter 10, in the first section, let's say verses 1 to 6, Jesus' main concern is to alert his listeners to how to spot false shepherds, the thieves and the robbers, and to introduce the business of voice recognition. Okay, so first of all, at verse 1 of John chapter 10, the thief and the robber climbs in the wrong way. In other words, their approach to the sheep is instantly suspect. You see somebody hopping over the wall, they're trying to evade detection, or they're up to no good, clearly. Whereas the shepherd doesn't need to climb over the wall to get in among the sheep. The shepherd's going to come in through the gate. In other words, open, authentic, real, honest, and above all, the way in, the way through, the access point will be the love of God. If God's love is not evident, that's not the voice of the Good Shepherd. That's another voice. If you think you see something good happening, Jesus is saying, remember there are thieves and robbers. There are those who are out to no good here. You'll spot them because of their inauthentic approach. So that, I think, is the first thing, that the way in, which is the concern of verses 1 and 2. Then, as we begin to talk about the voice recognition thing, there's an important point, I think, in the second half of verse 3. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. The real shepherd. The stranger doesn't know the sheep, doesn't know how to recognize them as individuals. They're not interesting to the thief and the robber just wants to grab some for another motive. The shepherd, however, knows the sheep, knows who they are, recognizes them for who they are. And so one way is that to recognize falsehood and the false voices is to say, actually, you're not paying attention to who I am. You don't even know who I am. And actually, you're not that interested, are you? I can tell. So there is another form of recognition of the illegal entry, if you like. And then Jesus moves in the balance of that first 6 verse section to the business of voice recognition, or when the stranger opens their voice and starts speaking. Well, the sheep ought to be able to tell the difference between their shepherd and a stranger's voice. If they hear a stranger's voice, be on guard, because that's the thief and the robber. So what he's really doing, I think, is saying, let's take a look at whether you can spot authenticity and something inauthentic when it comes to listening for the voice of God. Verses 1 to 6, I think, are about that. In verses 7 to 10, we have a switch of image. In this, it seems as if Jesus has become a gate. So for many of us, that will conjure up a picture that there may not be quite what Jesus means. What I suspect he means is the gate is that control point in which a shepherd very often uses their own body to control throughput by the sheep. I've helped shepherds and done it myself, and I've watched others do it. You stand in the opening that the sheep need to go through, and you use your own body to control which sheep go through, how fast, and so on. And that is the point at which the shepherd is often identifying which sheep should be going in and which sheep should not. So the point of being the gate is, I am also doing selecting. So there is, you are listening for my voice and you will be selecting me. But actually I'm also selecting you. Then we come into what most of us would recognise as the main point, really, the Good Shepherd bit. And that comes in verse 11. I am the Good Shepherd. It's one of the I am sayings of Jesus. There are some others, and it is repeated here again at verse 14. I am the Good Shepherd. What distinguishes the Good Shepherd, as I said in the main message, so I'm not going to go into it at length here, is the willingness to face death for the sake of the sheep. Only the shepherd, whose sheep they personally are, will walk into the jaws of death for the sake of the sheep. Others are just going to clear out the way once it gets that bad. And this is what I was saying. This is the thing where the cross proves Bethlehem, where the claim that the Magi are introduced to from the prophet Micah, that a great shepherd of God's people comes out of Bethlehem, is proven by that man from Bethlehem, Jesus, born in Bethlehem, who is willing to lay down his life, willing to face the cross for us, his sheep. And his simple claim is, you're not seeing others willing to do that. When it comes to facing what I had to face for you, they're not going to face it for you, but I will. And it's for that reason you should follow me rather than them. And that point then is strongly emphasized in that sort of section 11 to 13, and it reaches us with great power. So once again in verse 14, I am the Good Shepherd, and we're returning to the subject of laying down life, verse 15, and verse 14 itself. We know each other, There should be some mutual recognition here. How do you recognize God's voice among the millions of voices in the world? Actually, you're equipped to. You know what you need to know. You don't have to, get fancy about this. You're a human being made in the image of God. You are fundamentally equipped to recognize the voice of God in your life. And then the rest of that section emphasizing the laying down of life and so forth. And finally, in verse 16, we notice that Jesus says, and don't forget, in all this, as you follow me, there's a thing you're going to discover that may surprise you, which is others who belong, who it surprises you to find in the flock. I've got other sheep, and I'm going to join you all together as one harmonious flock. But it's a little indication that there's going to be some prizes in that business as we go. But the unity of those who follow Jesus together is also important. It's not just each individual sheep's relationship to the shepherd. It is the flock as well as a whole that matters. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope the main message made some sense to you, which is, I guess it did, otherwise you wouldn't be in this bit. And I hope we'll get to share a bit more in a week's time. God bless you, keep you safe and well as you look to the Good Shepherd and listen for the Good Shepherd's voice.